Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, we've reached Surah al Takathur in our journey with the study of the Meccan Quran. And Surah al Takathur is considered to have been revealed after Surah al Kawthar and before Surah al Ma'un. Based on that, some of the scholars say, many, in fact, a good majority say that it is to be considered Mecki. And that's the position of Imam Tahir ibn Ashur and Imam ibn Atiyah. It is numbered the 102nd chapter of the Quran. Therefore, we find it to be at the end of the Mus'haf. Imam al-Suyuti has very interesting things to say about this chapter of the Quran. But I wanted to read the translation before going into what it is that Imam Suyuti and others say about this chapter of the Quran that teaches us so much about human existence. Some translate the word takathur to mean the competition for gain, material gain. The translation reads, "In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful, competition for more gains diverts you from Allah until you end up in your graves. But no, you will soon come to know, again, no, you will soon come to know. Indeed, if you were to know your fate with certainty, you would have acted differently. But you will surely see the hellfire again. You will surely see it with the eye of certainty. Then on that day, you will definitely be questioned about your worldly pursuits." So the idea here is to wake us up. Dr. Fazlur Rahman, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said something very important. He said that the Quranic message is there to wake us up to reality. That's why the Quran is not necessarily giving us a point by point philosophical lesson on who Allah is, but is more jugging our hearts, prodding our minds, pushing our minds to think so that we can reflect properly and come to believe the truth of existence. The human being is the one that's in need of guidance. The human being doesn't discover the truth without the guidance that comes from Allah. And that guidance comes by reflecting properly on the natural world, the creation itself, and on revelation. Imam Suyuti says that the entire surah of Surah al Takathur explains the very reason why people fail, right? Why they end up being uh, thrown into a pit of fire. And then he quotes that Surah al Takathur explains the ayah of the Quran in Surah al Qariya, فَأُمُّهُ هَاوِيَةٌ, right? That their abode is a pit of fire, right? And so this ayah is tied to the reality of the scales. And the scales come back to the issue of the idea of al-mizan, the weighing of the deeds of the human being. Those whose scales weigh on the heavy side of good deeds, then they fare well. Those who scale weigh on the lighter side, then they are in trouble. These ayat of the Quran that come back to back are to be read together with each other. So that the Takathur comes in a series of ayat that are found in the Mus'haf. We mentioned that it comes before Al-Ma'un and after Al-Kawthar. in terms of revelation. So in Al-Ma'un, we get this push towards the taking care of the needy and the distraught, and Al-Kawthar, and this concept of belief in good and that good is rewarded and good is given to us, specifically the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then Surah Al-Takathur is talking about human beings being negligent in the remembrance of Allah by heart and deed. So when we talk about the belief in good, we're talking about the reality of believing how it is that Allah operates in this world and that good is rewarded and that there's a hereafter. That is a place of reward and benefit for those who realized what the meaning of life is. The meaning of life is to recognize the oneness of Allah wa ta'ala and to be responsible for ourselves in the way that we utilize our time, and to know how to employ our time properly to our benefit. And employing time properly means that we engage in good in the world. The human being is meant to be upright and good, and Allah rewards for that, but there's no doubt that there's a struggle. So the idea of being rewarded for deeds is a concept that we see initiated before Al-Adiyat, and then Al-Adiyat, Surah Al-Adiyat comes in to talk about how it is that human beings have a love of material wealth, and their love of the wealth and material gain in the dunya even pushes them to kill for it. And because of that pursuit that they have towards gaining in this world to the negligence of the hereafter, then they are confronted with the reality of resurrection and judgment. But Al-Adiyat talks about the inclination of human beings to seek out what is beneficial for themselves, but telling us that without revelation, we're really not going to know what is beneficial for us. So it's part of the inclination of the human being to think about the self, but we won't really have a clear understanding of what's good for us without revelation. Then we find that Al-Adiyat is followed up by Al-Qariya, Surah Al-Qariya, which talks about the hereafter, and it talks about the hellfire and the scale of deeds that the human being will have to present his deeds and her deeds by that scale. If the deeds are on the heavier side, then reward is given for benefit and goodness. If it falls short, then punishment comes. So that the Takathur comes after that, and it begins to talk about why it is that people go into the hellfire. Because of their occupation with gain in this world and their negligence on understanding the true nature of life themselves, and that they are created and who Allah is, the meaning of time. Then after that, Surah Al-Asr comes in the Mus'haf and explains the reality of how time operates and how humans use time and the value of good deeds and how it is that many are negligent of understanding time properly. Then that is followed up by Surah Al-Humazah, which is characterizing the person that thinks that their wealth is going to protect them from death, and how it is that they will have to face the reality of death, and that their amassing of wealth won't protect them from that reality. So we see that the Quran overall is talking to us about different stages of human beings when they are in states of unbelief. Let me say that again in a different way. Quran here is talking to us about how it is that human beings, when Iman, belief in Allah wa ta'ala and the hereafter, the unseen, when the belief is not set properly, how it is that you have people in different states of life, they take different positions. And they take different positions, and those positions that they take have to do with what? Have to do with living a lifestyle of unbelief, denying the hereafter, that denying that there's life after death, denying that there's reward for good deeds, not considering others, not knowing the value weighing harm and benefit in the spiritual sense, and being deluded by this world. Those chapters of the Quran teach us to be balanced in life. Of course, we can't engage in good deeds without material, gaining in material benefit. How do you give zakat if you don't gain in material? How do you do good in the world? Not everything is just a smile and an intention. When we talk about alleviating the conditions of the poor, when we talk about giving to the masajid, when we talk about building a good society, all of that means that the human being has to be aware of how to use material resources. So the material world is not bad. Unlike Christianity, Islam doesn't consider the material world to be bad or gaining wealth to be bad. It's about the attitude, the intention, and what one does with the wealth. Right? So we find that the Quran is outlining for us different stages of life. One of the things that is constantly being impressed is this issue of the hereafter, and that this world is limited in time, and that we have to use our time wisely, right? And one thing that is emphasized dramatically is this point of death itself, right? And it puts into perspective the human condition, right? Surah al Takathur is talking about the state of heedlessness. Overall, it's a study on why the state of kufr removes us from reflecting on the day of judgment. Why? Because it distracts us. And we become preoccupied in this case with the accumulation of resources and material gain, and we forget our purpose in life and what is the meaning, of utilizing the gifts that Allah has given us. Like, why is it that we're gaining in these things? Life is not just for the sake of just spending and shopping and accumulating and getting a bigger house and a bigger car and a bigger this and a bigger that and a bigger bank account. Life is supposed to have a purpose, and that purpose has to be one which allows us to grow mentally, spiritually, emotionally, materially as well, and keeps in balance our life in this world as a preparation for the hereafter. And there's other things to be said with regard to Surah Al-Takathur, but with that, we close and we ask that we reflect on the meaning of life and on the meaning of death and on the value of deeds and on the value of deeds. Are they valuable as far as being weighty on the scales, which we will have to confront, or do our deeds come up short? And there we begin to reflect on the concept of time and intention and why it is that we do things. So with that, we end. Assalamu alaikum.